So before we try out our new logging service, and as I said before, I'm being a bit of an optimist here, let's update the authentication service to actually log when someone successfully authenticates, okay? So to do that, I'm going to go over to I'll close the front end, and I'll go to the authentication service, and go to the CMD, and I'll go to the handlers file right here, okay? So this is where we authenticate. And of course, what I want to do is just before this payload JSON response is sent back, is I want to log the request. So log authentication. And I'll do that by creating a new function down here, just to keep things separate and easier to test. So I'll create a function with the receiver of app pointer to config, and I'll call this log request. And it'll just take two parameters. So we'll give it the two things we need in order to log something, name and data, both of type string. And it potentially returns an error. Okay? So let's create a variable, I'll call it entry, which will be of type struct. And it has the two fields we need to send to our logger service. Name, which is a string, and in JSON, I'll call that name. And then I'll duplicate that and make this data. And that's in JSON, we'll call that data, okay? And we'll populate its fields. So entry.name is equal to name, and entry.data is equal to data. Now, once we have that, this is really simple. We create some JSON data, and I'll ignore the error. When I call JSON.Marshall indent, and again, I would use Marshall in production. This is entry with no prefix, and indent everything with a tab. Okay? So I have that. Now what's my log service URL? Well, I'll do the same thing I did before. Log service URL is assign the value of http://logger-service/log. And logger.service is what it's called in the Docker Compose file, of course. Now I'll create a request and check for an error when I call http://newRequest, and it will be of type post, and it will go to log service URL, and I'm going to give it bytes.newBuffer, and I'll hand in JSON data. And I'll check for an error. If error is not equal to nil, then I'll return the error. Otherwise, I'm all set. Let's create a client, which is assigned the type of a reference to http.client. And we'll ignore the response, but we'll check for an error when we call client.do with our request. And if there's an error, we'll return that. So copy and paste. Otherwise, return nil. So this function exists now. So let's go back up here to where we say log authentication. And we'll simply say error is equal to app.logRequest and give that W. And we're going to give it the name of, just say authentication. It doesn't matter. And then we'll do a nicely formatted string format, sprintf. And we'll say %s logged in. And substitute user.email. And we'll check for an error. So I'll paste in what I have in my clipboard and just change this to app.errorJSON. And that requires W and the error, and we'll just return. Okay, so in theory, if we typed everything right, and chances are I did not, but we'll find out shortly, in theory, we should be able to now build our new Docker images, start up our front end, and try things out. And we'll do that in the next lecture.